I have always believed that certain mysteries reveal themselves only to those willing to listen to silence. And the desert, with its indifferent vastness, has always been the greatest guardian of these silences. Not the empty kind, but the kind that weighs on the air, a silence that vibrates, that contains layers of memory buried beneath millennia of sand. It was inside this kind of silence, thick and ancient, that the calling began. Throughout my career, I have walked through countless archaeological sites, touched walls that survived the collapse of entire civilizations, opened chambers forgotten for thousands of years. But nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to what I felt the first time I stood before the Pyramid of Khafra at dawn. The air still carried the cold of the night, and the darkened stones seemed to breathe. I'd always known that something lay beneath it, something the modern world had never truly uncovered, something absent from academic reports, from books, from the most restricted archives of the Cairo Museum. What I did not know was that this something had been protected for 12,000 years. My involvement began almost accidentally. I was reviewing documents about sealed chambers inside the pyramids when I received an unmarked package. Thick paper, aged seals, no return address. Inside the envelope were just two things: a map and a sentence written in ancient Arabic, the ink nearly erased by time. What was buried was not meant to be found. The map was unlike anything I had ever seen. It did not show internal passages of the pyramids, but rather something beneath them, a network of intertwined tunnels marked with symbols resembling pre-dynastic inscriptions, but much older, more primitive, and yet more sophisticated. As if they belonged to a tradition that existed long before the first Nile villages. In the lower corner, an impossible date, 10,000 BC, older than the Egyptian civilization itself, older than any known structure in that region. I tried tracing the document's origin. No one knew anything. Colleagues dismissed it as nonsense. Curators laughed. But I had never seen a forgery that aged so realistically under infrared light. That parchment didn't have centuries. It had millennia. So I decided to investigate on my own. I traveled to Egypt quietly, without notifying institutions or asking for formal permissions, carrying only portable equipment, my notebook, and a thin shirt that did nothing to protect me from the relentless sun. When I arrived at the pyramids, I sensed immediately that something was different. Soldiers patrolled with unusual frequency. Improvised barriers blocked access to certain points. It was as though they were hiding something, not from tourists, but from specific researchers. I walked toward the northern face of Khafra's pyramid, where the map indicated a sealed opening, a nearly invisible crack between massive blocks, something anyone else would ignore. I pressed my fingers against the fissure. The air escaping was cold, not the cold of shade, the cold of depth, the cold of places untouched by light for thousands of years. I placed my ear against the stone. Nothing, absolute silence. But something within that silence vibrated inside me. I took quick measurements. Resonance, frequency, abnormal, temperature, lower than expected. Magnetism, significantly elevated. The structure seemed to respond to my presence. That was the first moment I felt it. The sensation that someone was watching me from inside the stone. That night I returned. I waited for the patrol to pass. Using a thin titanium blade, I worked along the seam between the blocks. Delicate effort. The stone shifted slightly, not as if I had forced it open, but as if it had been waiting for someone to touch the exact right point. The fissure widened just enough for me to slip through. The air inside was not the typical scent of ancient Egyptian tunnels. No dusty limestone smell, no trace of desert wind. Instead, a metallic cold filled my lungs, a sterile, almost electric atmosphere that didn't belong to any known environment. I advanced with my flashlight. The corridor was narrow but impossibly smooth. The architecture did not match any dynastic era. This wasn't carved limestone. It wasn't granite. It was a metamorphic stone polished to an unnatural perfection, as if molded, not sculpted. A few meters in, the walls began to display markings. Not hieroglyphs, not pictograms. Curved lines, spirals, repeating segments that pulsed slightly when illuminated from certain angles. I studied them carefully, running my fingers along their edges. The instant my skin made contact, the wall vibrated back. Just a faint vibration, but unmistakably deliberate, like a response. The sound that followed echoed faintly, a low, mournful hum, as though the stone itself had exhaled after millennia of silence. I pressed on until the corridor opened into a circular chamber. The air was so still it felt heavy. At its center sat a platform unlike anything Egyptian. Older, more primitive, and yet more advanced. It wasn't decorative. It was functional. At the bottom of the chamber, drag marks scratched the floor. Something large had been placed there and later removed. But what petrified me completely was the inscription above the platform. Unlike the other markings, this one was unmistakable. 3 concentric circles cut by a straight vertical line, the symbol of a seal. A symbol I had seen in prehistoric Anatolian caves, in submerged Mediterranean ruins, in Ubaid artifacts predating the earliest dynasties. Below the seal, a warning carved in an archaic Proto-Sinaitic dialect. For 12,000 years we have guarded what must not awaken. My heart hammered. The chamber seemed to breathe. The air felt alive, and every step I took triggered faint echoes in the stone echoes that were not mine. Standing there, in the heart of a labyrinth no one alive should have known existed, I realized something that reshaped everything I believed about human history. There was something buried beneath the pyramids that was far older than the pyramids themselves. Something older than civilization. Something that was never meant to be found. And I was standing exactly where it wanted me. The circular antechamber before me looked like stone, yet not like any stone native to the Giza Plateau. Something about its texture, its density, the soft way it reflected my flashlight, everything contradicted what we know of ancient Egyptian engineering. There were no tool marks, no chisel scars, no natural imperfections. Everything there seemed molded with a precision that had no place in the dynastic timeline. And yet the chamber lay beneath the pyramids, the most measured and studied structures on Earth. But this chamber appeared on no map, no architectural blueprint, no modern scan. It had been erased or hidden from every method of exploration we have. Whether through intention or by some mechanism beyond our understanding, it had remained invisible. The central platform, however, was different. Unlike the chamber itself, the platform looked old, not in time, but in purpose. It radiated ritual significance. 3 steps encircled it like a miniature ziggurat, as though the structure was made to elevate or support something of immense importance. But it was empty. Boo. Whatever had once rested there was gone. I approached cautiously. Each step echoed differently, sometimes sharp, sometimes muffled, as though the chamber's geometry shifted with my movements, or worse, as though it were alive. When my hand brushed the platform's edge, a faint pulse traveled through it. Not a physical vibration, something deeper, as if a dormant resonance waited for a specific trigger. I closed my eyes and took a breath. The air felt heavier now, dense with invisible particles. The cold wasn't natural, not the cold of temperature, but the cold of absence, the cold of an environment never meant for human lungs. Yet opening the chamber hadn't been my first mistake, nor would it be my last. The first real clue appeared when I circled the room, studying every detail. On the wall opposite the entrance, I spotted a vertical contour almost invisible that resembled a seam. At first glance, It looked like a natural shadow between slabs. But when illuminated at the correct angle, the outline revealed itself. A hidden door. Tall, narrow, unnatural. Nothing like dynastic architecture. It resembled something much older, similar to polished stones found in Göbekli Tepe, yet even more refined. I pressed my fingers into the seam. The stone was too cold, too uniform, too deliberate. Then I noticed something. Faint marks of abrasion at the base of the door. Not natural erosion. Someone long ago had tried to open this door and failed. I swept the area with my light and found nothing obvious until one particular spiral symbol on the wall caught my attention. Unlike the others, its surface was smoother, worn down, polished by touch. A mechanism. I placed my hand on the spiral. A shock of cold raced through my skin, down my arm, settling deep in my chest. The door responded. It did not open. It did not shift. But it emitted a low internal crack, a deep, stone-born thunder that rippled through the entire chamber. I froze. The chamber awakened slowly. The light dimmed. The air thickened. The walls seemed to listen. I pressed my hand again. Nothing happened. The mechanism seemed to require more pressure, rhythm, warmth, a combination, perhaps a sequence. I remembered ancient rituals involving spirals in Anatolian caves, activation through heat, vibrations, or pulse. Pulse. The artifact I would later find would confirm this intuition. But at that moment, I only had instinct. I leaned closer and placed my ear against the hidden door. Silence. Then faint, almost imaginary, a second crack. It was evaluating me. I stepped back and continued studying the room. That was when I found the faint inscription near the floor on the western side, nearly erased by time, buried in shadow. I illuminated it, and my blood ran cold. Written in a primitive Proto-Sinaitic script, sealed to protect. Protect who? Protect what? Or protect from whom? Nearby a second inscription, more damaged, if opened. The Guardian awakens. The word guardian had appeared before in unrelated ancient sites, but its meaning varied. Spirit, force, mechanism, entity. But here, beneath the pyramids, the word carried a weight that transcended categories. I turned to examine the platform again. Kneeling, I noticed a small object lodged between two stones. It took careful effort to extract it, dust-covered, worn, but unmistakably artificial. When I cleaned it under my light, delicate micro-engraved patterns became visible. Not hieroglyphs, not cuneiform, not anything human, at least not anything belonging to known civilization. The patterns were too precise, too uniform, too mathematical. A code, a structured language, and the underside of the fragment was scorched. Heat, extreme heat. But there were no torches, no signs of fire, no airflow. A third crack echoed through the chamber, Siswang, stronger, more assertive. The platform trembled, the walls trembled, the floor trembled. The entire chamber seemed to release a breath it had held for millennia. The air snapped colder, not temperature cold, presence cold. Then I understood too late. The inscriptions, meaning 12,000 years of silence, was not protection. It was confinement. The first seal was broken. A low rhythmic pulse rolled through the chamber. The spiral symbols along the walls glowed softly, lighting one after another like a sequence awakening. The hidden door emitted a deep vibration, as if something behind it was stirring. The floor under my feet subtly shifted, not mechanically, but like a membrane responding to pressure. Then, footsteps. Not human footsteps, not animal. Something dragging, something heavy, something ancient. The sound approached the hidden door. For the first time since entering, my instinct screamed, "Leave, now," but I couldn't move. Part paralysis, part fascination, part inevitability. The mechanisms inside the door hissed. Dust fell. Stone clicked. Something behind the wall was waking. Something that had not moved in 12,000 years. And it knew I was there. For several long seconds, though they felt like minutes suspended outside of time, I remained kneeling before the platform, holding the cylinder as the chamber pulsed around me like a colossal living organism, awakening from a sleep older than civilization. The walls shimmered with an intensity that my flashlight could never produce on its own. Shapes that were once mere carvings now seemed to shift and breathe, syncing themselves with the heartbeat-like vibration coming from the object in my hand. The mental hum grew stronger, not a sound carried through the air, but a resonance pressed directly against my consciousness. It wasn't language, not really, yet it carried intention, structure, pattern, as though the artifact wasn't communicating with my mind, but with something older inside me, a layer of instinct or memory buried too deep to understand fully. I forced myself to breathe. When I raised my head, the seal symbol, the 3 spirals cut by a vertical line, wasn't just glowing on the walls. It was glowing beneath the platform, pulsing upward like a vein carrying light. The stone itself vibrated, aligning with the object I held. And then the chamber exhaled. The light dimmed slightly. The air pressure shifted. The vibrations steadied. The cylinder warmed in my hand, then cooled, then warmed again in a slow, measured pattern. It wasn't random. It was calibrating. I understood instinctively that the chamber had finished its first task. It had opened a path. Still gripping the cylinder, I rose. The room felt different now, as though the stone had retreated inward, making space for something that hadn't existed moments before. The faint hum of energy seeped through the soles of my boots, through the platform, through the air itself. I stepped toward the newly awakened seam in the wall, the hidden door. It opened fully only once the cylinder completed its pattern. Darkness spilled out, not darkness as an absence of light. This was a darkness with weight, a darkness that swallowed my flashlight beam entirely. For the first time since entering the pyramid's underbelly, a true fear tried to take hold inside me. A fear not of danger, but of revelation, the kind that permanently rearranges one's understanding of reality. Still, I stepped inside. The corridor beyond the door was narrower than the previous one, narrow enough that my shoulders nearly grazed the walls, and strangely, the stone was warm to the touch. Not heated, warmed, as though something flowed beneath it, something alive. Each step I took echoed with a slight delay, like the sound had to travel through the corridor and return from somewhere much farther away. Halfway through, I realized that even my breath felt different, thicker, heavier, as if the air wasn't meant for lungs. When the corridor finally opened, I froze. The room ahead was nothing like the antechamber. It wasn't ceremonial. It wasn't symbolic. It was functional. A chamber built not to guard, but to maintain. The walls were lined with slabs of a material I still cannot identify. Not metal, not stone, something between the two. Some slabs pulsed with faint light, like dim embers beneath the surface. Others were dark and dead. This wasn't a tomb. It wasn't a temple. It was a system. At the center stood a low pedestal. Upon it rested something that immediately stole my breath. A second object, not cylindrical like the one I held, but a prism, elongated, translucent, with an inner core of shifting light. The core rotated slowly, like a tiny creature or mechanism suspended in amber. When I stepped closer, the cylinder in my hand began to vibrate. Light ran along its surface. The engravings shimmered. The pulse matched the rotation inside the prism. The two objects were connected, not complementary, integral. parts of a mechanism broken apart and separated deep beneath the pyramid to prevent activation. The moment I realized this, the room responded. Every slab in the walls lit up at once. A soft mineral glow filled the chamber. Symbols began to reveal themselves along the walls, rising like invisible ink exposed to heat. And then the inscriptions rearranged themselves in my mind. I do not know how else to describe it. The symbols did not move. They did not change shape. But somehow I understood fragments of their meaning, as if the chamber was pushing comprehension directly into my awareness. On the north wall, a slab tilted forward slightly, revealing text carved in a script older than anything found in Egypt, older than Sumer, older than Göbekli Tepe. The symbols belonged to a language with no surviving descendant. Yet, I could read pieces of it. Here lies what remains, of those who came before, those who taught, though they should not. The Guardian holds them. Disturb not the seal. The word Guardian appeared again, but this time surrounded by context that chilled me. The form is not life, but watchfulness. It watches until the return. I stepped back. Every cell in my body urged caution. Then the sound came. At first, a low scrape. Then a dragging, then a patterned vibration, breath-like. Not from the corridor, not from behind me, from inside the chamber itself, from the far wall. My flashlight trembled. The cylinder vibrated violently. The prism's core spun faster, flashing in bursts. A deep crack split across the wall. Not a door, a recess, a containment, a prison. Dust fell in soft waves. The stone receded inward. A dark cavity expanded, deep and ancient. Something inside it moved. Not quickly, not aggressively, but inevitably. A silhouette emerged, though not a shape belonging to any creature. Not fully organic, not fully mechanical. Something hybrid, something designed, something awakened. Its surface was mineral, yet flexed like tissue. Its edges pulsed. Its form shimmered, flickering between solidity and suggestion. A guardian, a sentinel left beneath the pyramids for 12,000 years. Its attention, its awareness landed on me instantly. The cylinder in my hand hummed one final time and then went still. Something had been triggered. Something ancient. Something irreversible. And it knew my presence. For a moment I could not move. The sight before me was so alien, so removed from every category of understanding I had, that my body reacted not with panic, but with suspension. Total, absolute stillness. The wall continued to retract, stone gliding backward with impossible smoothness, as if the chamber had been built not from blocks but from a single organism shifting its own skin. The cavity widened, and the dim light of the room barely penetrated what lay inside. Shapes pulsed within the darkness, not moving, but vibrating, as if the absence of motion itself was part of the mechanism. The Guardian did not step forward. It simply existed at the threshold, radiating presence. The cylinder in my hand warmed again. The prism on the pedestal rotated faster. Light danced between the two objects, forming a rhythmic exchange. The air thickened. The chamber hummed like a giant throat preparing to speak. I took one step back. Not out of fear, fear came later, but out of instinct. I suddenly understood that the Guardian wasn't waking up because of me. It was waking because the system had detected that a sequence had been activated. A sequence sealed away for 12,000 years. And yet, the moment the Guardian's awareness focused on me, I felt an unmistakable shift, as if it recognized me. No, not me personally, but my presence, my physiology, my mind running through patterns the chamber had been built to read. It felt like being scanned by something that was not alive in the way that living beings are, but not dead either. something in between. The Guardian's outline stabilized, tall, elongated, with limbs that tapered into geometric shapes rather than fingers or joints. Its torso rippled like layered mineral sheets flexing in slow waves. One side of its body was smooth stone. The other side looked half sintered, half melted, as though it had been burned or transformed at some point in the distant past. And yet, it pulsed. A rhythm, a breath that wasn't breath, a life that wasn't life. I lifted the cylinder slightly. It responded immediately, vibrating in perfect harmony with the Guardian's pulse. That was when I realized the cylinder wasn't just a key. It was a transmitter, or worse, a trigger QN. I was holding the activation sequence to something that had never been meant to awaken again. The Guardian stepped forward, not with legs, not with motion. It glided. Or rather, the space between it and the room shifted, compressing, altering, bending in tiny, imperceptible distortions that made the movement seem fluid. My stomach twisted. The air grew colder. The chamber walls lit up again, one slab at a time, revealing patterns and inscriptions previously hidden. They formed a moving halo around the Guardian, like a shield of symbols. Some glowed brighter as it passed, others dimmed. Its presence interacted with the room as if it was part of the architecture, or the architecture was part of it. The mental hum intensified, not painful, not overwhelming, but precise, targeted. The Guardian wasn't threatening me, it was reading me. The way one reads a tablet. The hum coalesced into a pattern, not speech, but something more fundamental. A sequence. A pulse of meaning. Sequence activated. The words were not words, yet the meaning dropped into my awareness like a weight. I clutched the cylinder tighter. The Guardian's surface flickered, revealing glimpses of something inside. Veins of light, circuits maybe, or channels of mineral energy. Its whole body was a mechanism, a container for something older than language. I looked around the chamber and noticed another change, something subtle but unmistakable. The slabs were no longer simply glowing. They were responding to the Guardian's proximity. Their patterns shifted like ripples in water. The Guardian stopped near the pedestal holding the prism. The prism's inner core spun wildly now, emitting flashes that painted the chamber in spirals of white and blue. The hum of the room changed pitch, synchronizing with the core. Then I realized what was happening. The Guardian was not waking up. It was rebooting. The prism pulsed again, once, twice, then continuously sending energy into the room. And the Guardian responded with a faint vibration that felt like acknowledgement, as though the two had been separated for millennia and were now recognizing each other again. I took another step back, and the Guardian reacted instantly. It turned toward me, not with a head, not with eyes, but with the subtle rotation of its entire structure, as if orienting itself toward the source of interference. The hum thickened. Images flashed in my mind. Brief, disjointed, impossible. A city buried beneath oceans of sand, structures that shifted like living stone. Beings tall and elongated teaching early humans, the sky filled with storms of light, the collapse of an age erased by rising floods, and the ceiling of the Guardian deep beneath the desert. I staggered, clutching the platform to steady myself. For a moment, I wasn't in the chamber. I was inside those memories, caught inside something that remembered long before humans wrote their first symbols. The Guardian advanced again, slowly, silently. The hum sharpened, containment breached, another flash. A group of figures not human sealing the chamber, locking the door, placing the cylinder into the platform, activating the seal for the last time. Then darkness, then silence, then 12,000 years of waiting. The Guardian's shape flickered and stabilized. It had finished rebooting. The prism dimmed, the slabs dimmed. The room exhaled a deep tremor that shook dust from the ceiling. I realized, with a clarity so cold it felt like metal, that the mechanism had completed a cycle. A cycle I had triggered. A cycle I could not reverse. The Guardian lowered its body slightly, a motion that felt like observation, not aggression, not hostility, but purpose, awaiting directive. The meaning dropped into my mind as sharply as a blade. And at that moment, I understood the most terrifying truth of all. The Guardian wasn't waking up to destroy anything. It wasn't waking to harm. It wasn't waking to protect something from us. It was waking because, for 12,000 years it had been waiting for an instruction. A new instruction. From whoever activated the seal. From whoever held the cylinder. From me, the chamber quieted. The hum softened. The Guardian stood perfectly still, shimmering faintly in the dim light, waiting. For a command I could never give. For a purpose I could not comprehend. For a cycle that should never have been restarted. And in that moment, with the weight of 12,000 years pressing down on me like stone, I understood. I had opened something ancient, something deliberate, something patient. And now, beneath the pyramids, it was waiting for what came next. Tick. That day became marked in my memory not because of what I saw, for what I saw could never truly fit into any ordinary narrative, but because of what I felt afterward. Leaving the chamber where the Guardian awakened was like emerging from inside a foreign body. Every muscle in my body reacted to memories I had not lived. Every external sound seemed to echo as if mirrored by something deep underground. The corridor behind me closed with a slow, grinding sound, as if the structure was sealing not just the room, but something within me. Back in the antechamber, I sat on the cold stone floor and let the lights of my equipment capture whatever they could. The recordings trembled. My camera picked up frequencies my ears couldn't hear. The audio showed spikes that, when processed, formed patterns identical to the inscriptions on the walls. Export. It was as if the chamber had translated its message into vibration, bypassing language entirely. And somehow, I had been part of that exchange. I must be honest, for hours I felt a kind of vertigo, not physical, but cognitive. Images that didn't belong to me flooded my mind. Vast cities carved into shifting stone, rivers flowing in unnatural directions, colossi buried and unearthed across cycles, silhouettes of beings both graceful and impossible. I heard tonal sequences, not voices, but something closer to structured resonance that my mind attempted to interpret as language. I saw faces that looked both ancient and otherworldly. I couldn't tell where perception ended and influence began. Those memories were not mine, but they had entered me. In the weeks that followed, my life unraveled. I returned to the surface with samples, recordings, and fragments. I sent them to trusted laboratories under different pretexts. I ordered isotopic analysis, metallographic tests, resonance imaging, diffraction scans. The results came in waves of contradiction. The materials were anomalous. A mineral with piezoelectric properties far beyond any known naturally occurring crystal. Stone that responded to heat and pressure in controlled, patterned outputs. Samples that emitted faint electromagnetic frequencies even without stimulation. Nothing fit within archaeology. Nothing fit within geology. Nothing fit within any discipline, researchers argued. Some claimed contamination, others suggested mislabeling. A few admitted what I already knew. These samples did not belong to any known chapter of Earth's history. Then came the interpretations, the hunger for publication, prestige, recognition, invitations, questions, pressure. People wanted access to the data, the coordinates, the context. And behind those requests came something darker. Individuals I didn't recognize began asking about my work. Emails vanished. Files were accessed without permission. Doors that had always been open were suddenly locked, and the nights were the worst part. The hum returned, not in my ears, but inside my head, the same frequency the cylinder had imprinted on me. My dreams were no longer mine. I walked through corridors of impossible geometry. I saw spirals everywhere, on walls, in sand, in the sky, and sometimes I felt the presence of something behind me. Not threatening, not benevolent, just present, watching the Guardian. Or the memory of it. I still don't know. By the fourth week, I made a decision that went against everything I had been trained to do. I withheld information, not to hoard it, not to claim ownership, but because releasing it felt dangerous. I began cataloging everything in layers: benign data, safe to share; controlled data, shareable with restrictions; sensitive data, for institutional archiving only; prohibited data, not to be reproduced under any circumstance. The last category grew quickly. Sequences of symbols that produced cognitive shifts, acoustic patterns that triggered geometric hallucinations, energy measurements that caused resonance in lab equipment even when it was turned off. Something about the Guardian, or the mechanism that sustained it, interacted with observers, psychologically, cognitively, perhaps even physically. I documented changes in colleagues, recurring dreams, compulsive drawing of symbols, sudden absences. A technician began sketching interrupted triangles on every page of his notebook without realizing it. That was when I tightened protocols again. Smaller teams, compartmentalized tasks, encrypted archives stored in separate institutions. And even then, I sensed pressure building, as if something in the system not human wanted this cycle to continue, wanted the seal to open further. But I refused. I created a personal record, incomplete by design, with instructions. Do not replicate the patterns. Do not attempt to rebuild the acoustic frequencies. Do not attempt to digitally enhance the sequence. If cognitive symptoms appear, cease contact immediately, but warnings only work on people who believe in risk. For those driven by curiosity or power, warnings mean nothing. When the first proposal came, substantial funding to continue research without restrictions, I realized something with icy clarity. Someone wanted the mechanism active. Someone wanted the Guardian awakened. Or worse, they wanted control over it. I refused every offer, and the pressure tripled. I began to understand why the ancients had sealed everything beneath thousands of tons of stone, why they had created a Guardian, why they had buried not history but knowledge, not to protect themselves, to protect everything else. Eventually, I was forced to take the final step. I gathered the non-dangerous physical samples and placed them in institutional archives with strict oversight. I distributed incomplete datasets to trusted researchers so that no single group could reconstruct the system. I fragmented all cognitive risk material into encrypted vaults. But the true artifacts, the cylinder, the prism, the core fragments, those never left my custody. They are sealed, not buried, not hidden, sealed. Under protocols I designed and controls that require multiple institutions to agree before opening. I do not keep them out of fear. I keep them out of responsibility, because I now believe, deeply, unshakably, that the system beneath the pyramids was not built for humans. We were not meant to activate it. We were not meant to understand it. We were not meant to carry it forward. The Guardian is not a creature, not a machine. It is a protocol, a sentinel, a memory, a function, something that watches, something that waits, something that completes cycles whether we want them or not. As I write this, I still hear the hum, quieter now, but constant, like a faint heartbeat at the edge of thought. Sometimes I see spirals in the dark when I close my eyes. Sometimes I feel the weight of a presence observing, evaluating, waiting. And I know The 12,000 years I uncovered did not end with me leaving the desert. The cycle did not close. I simply became its next witness, its next custodian, its next seal. There are discoveries that expand humanity, and there are discoveries that humanity is not prepared to expand. Beneath the pyramids lies one of the latter. I touched something ancient, and it touched back,